Again, based on our last video, right, we now have a working prototype for our inference pipeline. So in this instance now, as we can see, we run an inference. We are going to we will remove this from here eventually, but this is just for us to confirm that it works. So we can start investigating this from our touch model, from ML model here, right? So as you can see, we see touch model inference results is like a class of ultralytics engine results, where we then try to use a loop to go through. Before we even discuss that, we can see that we have key points, we have mask, we have names of our classes, we have the images, arrays, and things like that. So that was why we then had to iterate for our end result. We got the bounding boxes and we then extracted the class names. Like for us to just get the intuition of why we had this here. So and if we go deeper, right, we then go to our I would say prediction, our saved prediction ID, and that is in our repository that we logged. See, as you can see, saved prediction ID and our model version. So which before we then come to our main.py here, where we have our prediction results in main. So we'll be moving to our router layer, which is a layer where you can actually send an image from an API endpoint, which you would see on our Swagger documentation page. So let's go back to our API layer. Let's go to our prediction. Let's create schemas.py and let's create router. So we need to discuss the importance of schemas. Yes, we'll be using data classes, we'll be using data structures to ensure we have contracts of data being sent in things like our entities here, right? We have our detection, we have our prediction. We also need to create another layer of this for other services or for other interfaces that wants to interface with our entire API, like the contact points between our API and every other thing that connects to it, right? So this is where we define our request, and response schemas. So we use Pydantic for this. From Pydantic, import our base model. We then say from src.domain.entities, we have to import the prediction. We have to import our prediction result. Import prediction. We can then say our class. For our detection schema, it should match what we had. Detection schema, which will take in our base model, would have our class ID. Let's copy what we have here. Yes. Then we then define our prediction response. We can then, where we have our ID, which is our UUID, let's import UUID from here. Import from UUID. Import UUID. We have this. We then say our image URL, which should also be a string. This could be none sometimes. Our image URL. Now, the reason why this could be none is that, for example, let's say we send a prediction, we send the request for a prediction and it did not go through. Like, let's say there were no detections, or let's say there was an error. So that means our ID will be none. So we have to account for that part. Detections will be a list. Let's import from typing import lists and possibly dict. We may need it. Import optional. Okay, so this is going to be list of detections, or let's say our detection schema in this instance now. So we then have our model version, which is going to be string, also defaults to none. So we then create a class method, def from domain. We want to convert our domain to our prediction response. From domain, it takes in our CLS and it takes in our P, which is our prediction. It returns a prediction response. So we then return CLS. We now say our ID is what? P.id. But let's make this a string now. Let's make this a string now. A string or none. So we are going to do string because in some cases you can't serialize a UUID to through a response. So image URL is equal to p the image URL. Then we then have detections is equal to detection schema, then to dict, yes, for d in p dot detections. Then we have our model version as what? Our p dot model version. Okay, so eventually for now let's have like a base implementation for our review, even though we are not completing that. Review request, base model, then actual label, which is string, is correct, which is bool. We then have a review response, also a base model. We then have our status has string, which should be updated. So let's also have class lists predictions, unreviewed predictions, which would take in the base model also, but now it would be a list. Predictions will be a list of what? Of prediction response. So list unreviewed predictions response. Okay, so this is going to be like as we've seen so far, our detection schema. These are prediction schema that contains our detections and our model version, and this is for when we want to list our unreviewed predictions. So let's go to our router now so that we can actually see it on our Swagger docs. So this is our predictions API router, import shortil, import UUID from path lib, import path from dependency injection, then C injector dot wiring import provide, and also inject, which would see inject. Okay, so from FastAPI, import our API router once again, import depends, import file, import HTTP exception, import query, import upload file, import status. Okay, so we then have to import our models, our schemas rather, from src.api.predictions.schemas, import our prediction response. Let's import all of them. Prediction response. Okay, what else? Review request, lists on reviewed prediction response, review requests, also review response. Okay, so we then have to import our container from src.config.dependency injection. No, the container, we have our container there. Import our container. We then have to import settings from src.config.settings. Import our get settings. Import, or just import the settings. What else? We have to import our inference pipeline from src.core.inference pipeline. Import inference pipeline. We then have to import our prediction service from src.infrastructure.services.prediction service. Import prediction service. Okay, so we then have utils.logger, import get logger. Logger is equal to get logger. So we then have to define our router. Our router is what? API router. API router prefix is equal to, we have it as predictions. Then we have our tags as what? Our predictions. Okay. So we then define our endpoint routers as at router.post, since we are creating records. Then we call this our predict, yes. Or let's have this like this. Let's have it multi-line to make it readable. Predict, we have our response model. Response model is our prediction response. This ensures that we have a stable contract between the client that we call in our application and our server. So we then have status code is what? Status.http p201. Okay. Let's just use 200. Okay, so we then have that. So we then define our method, our function for our endpoint, define as predict. We then say we need a file to be uploaded here. The file will be what? It will be upload file. To be upload file, data type, which is file, and then short to request it from the user. Okay, so what else? We need our pipeline. As you can see, we are not actually creating a new class here. We are just injecting our container, which we are going to see now. Inference, it will be our inference pipeline. but it's equal to depends on our what? Provide. You would only know this when you work with the dependency injection container dot inference pipeline. So you're actually giving it the inference pipeline from the container, not by instantiating the new class manually. We then have settings is what? Settings, which is equal to what? Our container.config. So let's just copy this so we won't have to stress ourselves with that. Now container.config, which is what we have in our container. Let's go back there to confirm. Config, container, we have our config here. Okay, so let's proceed. We then say this returns a prediction response. Okay, so we then add like a documentation here for the person who wants to integrate for that to say, okay, upload an image to run inference. The model confidence filtering, image storage, and DB persistence will happen for you to get a response. So we then have to save. For now, we'll be moving to actually use a temporary path, right, for this. But in actual production environment, the best case scenario is actually loading the image byte into memory and sending the image byte to YOLO to predict. But let's proceed with this now. So temporary path is what? Let's create a temporary path is equal to our temp. Let's create a new UUID for this request. UUID.UUID4. UUID4. No, this should be outside. UUID4. Then our file, the file name. File name, so that we can confirm that logger.info. This should be predict. So logger.info temporary path is what? TMP path. Okay, so we then have this in the try and except, try, except exception, except exception as E. We then do logger.error, error occurred, or just error in predict endpoint, then have our E here. Okay, so we then raise an HTTP exception, raise HTTP exception, and say status code. Status code is what? Status dot HTTP 500 internal error, internal server error, okay. We then say detail is what? An error occurred while running Inference. So after that, we then take a finally to clean our 5 parts. But before we get there, let's proceed to actual implementation. We then say with open temp paths as write in write mode as f, and then shuttle dot copy file, just copy the file object, copy file obj, and do file dot file, and then our actual file. So we then say results is equal to what? Await pipeline dot run temp paths, then settings the model version. Yes. We then say return our prediction response dot from domain, then our results. So we have that. So after it's done, it needs to clean up paths, temp paths dot onlink. We have to delete it. Onlink missing okay for when it's already unlinked is equal to true. Here, so we have our first endpoint. Let's load our API once again. Before we load it, let's remove these inference tests and let's proceed. Python main.py. We have our API started. Let's come here. As you can see, we still do not have our prediction endpoint here. We still have something to do here. We have to import our prediction router here. So from src.api.prediction.router imports router as prediction router. So we then proceed to do what? We have to wire it into our module. So we have to come here to and say src.api.prediction.router. Then after we've done that, we then come here to include it into our API application. So we then do prediction router, and let's see what we have. Let's reload. We have prediction, not prediction. So where is that bug? In our router here. Prediction. Okay. So let's clear this and let's restart. So there is a bug here. src.api.predictions. Let's clear our terminal so we can see the bug. So in order to save time, let's just use an AI model to do what again? To debug, to make our work faster. So ChatGPT, let's paste it and let's see what it tells us. So it tells us that, okay, so I wrote a bug here, so this should not be, this should be this. That was an error. Let's clear this and let's start up our API once more. Okay, inference pipeline, that's another bug. Inference pipeline. Okay, so let's restart. It has started. Let's go back to our docs page and let's reload. As you can see, we now have a predict endpoint. Let's run our image. Let's come to this. Images are pulled. We have an error. It says provide objects as no attributes run. So the thing is, when you use dependency injection, I purposely allow this error to happen. And you are using the container and you've wired your routers to your container, you need to add a decorator here, which is called @inject, to actually inject the container into your router. So let's restart our application and let's get this, run our inference once again, and voila, we have our predictions. Now we have, again, we are using a sample URL here. We didn't fully wire the storage. We are going to be doing that in our subsequent videos. So as you can see now, we have this. For us to verify if we actually have a database to connect to query, let's check it. Let's confirm that we have our database, even though we can see it here as full detection DB. Let's now say SQLite 3. SQLite 3. Our fruit detection.db. Fruit detection.db. And we can say select. Let's just check our tables to confirm that we have our tables. We have prediction logs, so select star from prediction logs. And voila, we have our data there. As we can all see, this is getting interesting, so we can just exit. Okay, so we have our API running inferences, and we have this. So what happens is that when you send this to the UI, right, they can then use this to make plots on the image, or rather you could also proceed to actually annotate the image, an example image, which we are also going to be looking into in our next videos. So but let's proceed to just add one more endpoint to do what? To list our predictions, our unreviewed predictions, which is to get our what? Get our predictions. So let's just copy this to make things simpler. So this is just a get endpoint. We are not posting anything into our database. This is a get, router.get. So we have this as this. Let's use our response model. Lists, okay. So let's even ignore our response model for now. Let's ignore it for now. So we really don't need our file here. We need something different here, even though we need something different here. So which are limits. Our limits should be an hint of a query. Get it from the user. Query 50, yes, and must be greater than 1 and must be less than 100. So we then have to do for offsets. So we then need our prediction service, not our inference pipeline now, so that we can just get it from our database. Prediction service. Which is our prediction service. This is our prediction service. So we then say list predictions. Okay, we don't need this temp part anymore in here. We don't need this. We just have to do error in fetching predictions. So this should be get predictions. So error occurred while fetching predictions. We do not need a finally here since we are not cleaning up anything. So we just have to return our awaits prediction service dot. Let's see what we have in our prediction service. Get unreviewed as date. Let's use this. Let's use this instead of having to do all that. At least for now. The get and have our limit is equal to limit and offset is equal to offset. Okay, so let's start our API once more. Let's reload our docs page. As you can see, we now have a new endpoint. Let's come here and say limit. Oh, this should be 0. This should default to 0 actually. And let's say this should be, we should not have a less than for this. Should be greater than 0. Okay, so let's reload. And let's reload once more. Okay. Let's now get internal server error. Okay, there is an error somewhere. Okay. It says there is an error that we have to fix. So, as dicts, okay. Let's just debug this with ChatGPT once again to make it faster. It's a response error. Let's have it fix this for us also. Okay. Okay. Oh, I think this is our problem for now. Let's remove it. So let's close this. And let's have it once again. We have no result. This is empty. Why is it empty? We should not have an empty result. Why do we have an empty result? Okay. Let's say we want page 1. Still an empty result. Why do we have an empty result? So let's do logger.info. Logger.info. Let's predictions is what? Our predictions. Let's confirm that we actually get here. So let's restart. Okay, from utils.logger, import get logger. Logger is equal to get logger. Okay, so clear. So let's run our request once again. We have empty predictions. Let's go into our repository and say get unreviewed. So we have this. Then why do we have an empty result? Select prediction log, the where prediction log is correct is none. Order by prediction the created at. Let's logger.info predictions in repository, which is our results, which is our logs rather. Okay, so let's restart our API and see what happens. So predictions, there are more than one. So why are we not getting something? So self.domain. Okay, let's do this. Formatted is equal to, let's log our formatted to see what happens. Log formatted, then return formatted. Okay, so let's restart and let's see what happens. Do we have formatted? We have predictions formatted. We have predictions formatted. We have predictions formatted. So let's see what happens. Okay, this is not actually. This should have formatted our result for us. This should have formatted our result for us. Why is it not formatting? Self dot to domain log for log in our logs. That this was the error. We were actually trying to serialize the result instead of the logs. So that was our bug. So let's fetch once again, and voila, we have our detection. So in our next video, we are going to be seeing how we finally connect it to our Etna bucket and actually plot annotations. And then from our subsequent videos, we are going to move into containerization and deploying to cloud. Thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.